I'm Hannah Whitmore, 28 years old, and for most of my life, I genuinely believed my own father didn't see me as a person, just as a line item on a balance sheet that wasn't performing well enough. The night he made that official, I was wearing the champagne-colored dress I'd bought on clearance at a Macy's in Lincoln Park, standing in the middle of a private dining room at our family's flagship restaurant on Michigan Avenue, surrounded by people who'd known me since I was in pigtails. My brother's engagement party, white tablecloths, $100 bottles of Cabernet on every table, a string quartet playing something I think was Vivaldi, but honestly I was too nauseous to tell. And my father, 3 glasses deep, decided that the toast he was going to give wasn't going to be about my brother and his fiancée, it was going to be about me. He raised his glass. Everyone went quiet. I remember thinking, please don't. To Marcus and Caroline, he said, and the whole room exhaled with relief, including me. Then he kept going. Who remind us what this family stands for? Excellence, legacy, showing up. He paused and his eyes found mine across the table. Unlike some people at this table who've spent the last 6 years embarrassing the Whitmore name with hobby blogs and gas station tacos, a few people laughed. Not because it was funny, because they didn't know what else to do. My older brother Marcus, who was supposed to be the guest of honor, looked at his shoes. His fiancée Caroline tried to make eye contact with me and I looked away because if she'd been kind to me right then, I would have cracked. My mother kept her hand on her wine glass like it was the only thing anchoring her to the floor. And my father just smiled at me. This small, tight smile he gets when he thinks he's won something. I'd promised myself on the drive over that I wasn't going to make a scene. I'd promised my mother that morning when she called and begged me to come, said she was finally going to talk to him, said things were going to be different. I'd promised myself I'd sit there, smile, eat the duck confit, leave by 10. But I stood up. I didn't even decide to. My body just did it. You're right, Dad, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice came out. I'm an embarrassment to this family, so go ahead and take my name off the lease at the West Loop building too. I won't be needing it. The room did this thing where the air just stopped moving. My uncle's wife actually gasped, like in a movie. My father's smile froze on his face. My mother said my name once, very quietly, like a prayer she didn't expect to be answered. I set my napkin down. I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't look at anyone except my brother, who finally lifted his head and mouthed, "I'm sorry." And that almost broke me, because Marcus never apologized for anything in his life. The valet at the front had my Camry waiting before I even got my coat. I think he could see it on my face. I tipped him $40 because I had it in cash and because I needed to be kind to someone in that moment. And I drove home to my apartment in Logan Square with the windows down even though it was the second week of October in Chicago and I should have been freezing. I wasn't freezing. I felt like I was made of light. That was the night everything broke open. And before I tell you what happened after, before the part where my brother showed up at my apartment 3 months later with a cardboard box and the truth, I have to back up, because nothing about that toast came out of nowhere. 28 years of small cuts had been building to it. And if I'm being honest, part of me had been waiting for him to say it out loud my whole life. Tell me in the comments, if it came down to your family or your own self-respect, which one would you choose? Because I had to choose that night, and I don't think most people understand what that actually costs until they're standing in it. My father is Richard Whitmore. He's 63 years old, and if you live in the Midwest and you've ever celebrated an anniversary at a restaurant with white linen napkins and a sommelier who pretends to remember you, there's a decent chance you ate at one of his. The Whitmore Restaurant Group owns 7 concepts across Chicago, Milwaukee, and Minneapolis, fine dining mostly. One steakhouse, a French-leaning bistro near Wrigley, that's been in food magazines twice. My father started with one place in Lakeview in 1991 and built the whole thing himself, and I am not going to pretend that isn't impressive. It is. He worked 16-hour days for 2 decades and missed almost every birthday I ever had, and the result is an empire that puts about 200 people on payroll. He's proud of it. He should be. My mother, Diane, is 61. She handled the books in the early years, then transitioned into what she calls hospitality, but is really just being the wife of a successful man, charity boards, the Lyric Opera Benefit Committee, Lunches at the East Bank Club. She is not a cruel person. She is just a person who decided a long time ago that keeping the peace was worth more than keeping her daughter. And then there's Marcus. My brother is 32, executive chef at our flagship, the one on Michigan Avenue I told you about, and the heir apparent. He went to the Culinary Institute of America, did 2 years staging in France, came back and worked his way up exactly the way our father wanted him to. He's good at his job. He's also, for most of our lives, been the brother who pretended he didn't know me when his friends came over. Me, I went a different way. I always loved food, but I loved the wrong kind. I loved the tamales the abuelas were selling out of coolers in Pilsen. I loved the Italian beef at Johnny's. I loved my best friend Sophia's mom's pozole, which she made every New Year's Day and which I'd been eating since I was 7 years old. When I told my father at 16 that I wanted to be a food writer, he laughed. Not cruelly. Worse, like I'd told a joke. Hannah, food writing isn't a career. It's something English majors do until they get a real job. I went to Northwestern anyway. Journalism school. He paid for it because that's what you did for Whitmore children. But every dinner I came home to, he'd ask me when I was going to stop playing around. Marcus would chime in with something cutting and then look at his plate. My mother would change the subject. I graduated in 2018. I moved into a one-bedroom in Logan Square that I could barely afford, took a job copywriting for a marketing agency in the Loop, and on nights and weekends, I started a blog called Cheap Plates. It was just me eating at places that didn't have Valichates, taquerias in Little Village, the diner in Bridgeport that's been open since 1957, that one Polish place in Avondale where the peerages cost $5 and the woman who runs it remembers what you ordered the last time. I wrote about the people. The recipes that traveled across oceans inside someone's grandmother's head. The stories. The first year, I had maybe 200 readers. Most of them were Sophia and her sisters. But I kept going. By the end of 2020, I had a newsletter with 3,000 subscribers. By 2022, 15,000. I started a podcast, Cheap Plates, Real Stories, and got picked up by a small Chicago network. I quit the marketing job in early 2023 and started writing freelance for Eaters Chicago and Bon Appetit's online section. I was making maybe $62,000 a year, which is not a lot in Chicago, but it was mine. Every dollar of it, and I'd never been happier. My family thought it was a joke. Every dinner, and they were monthly, sometimes more, because my mother insisted and because I kept showing up. I have to be honest about that because the truth matters here. People ask me now, when I tell this story, why I kept going. Why I didn't just stop. And the answer is complicated, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Part of it was my mother. She'd been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer in 2021, caught it early, had a lumpectomy and radiation, and was fine. But those dinners became her thing, the one ritual she insisted on. She'd call me on Sunday afternoons and say, "Please, just come. Your father will be on his best behavior. I need this," and I'd go. Because she was my mother and she'd just had cancer and I loved her, and because I told myself it wasn't really that bad. I told myself I was strong enough to handle it. Part of it was something uglier than that, though. Part of it was that I still wanted him to see me. I was 26, 27 years old, building something real on my own. And I still walked into those dinners, hoping that this would be the night my father said, "I read your piece, Hannah." It was good. He never did. But I kept showing up anyway, because hope is the hardest thing in the world to put down once you've been holding it your whole life. The dinners were always at one of his restaurants. He liked that. He liked walking through the dining room and being greeted by name, like the servers fussing over us, like turning to me and saying, "See, this is what real work looks like with food I'd actually written about more compellingly in a 1,000-word essay about a hot dog stand." Marcus would usually be in his chef's whites because he was running the kitchen, would come sit with us between courses, would make some comment about how my latest piece on a Filipino restaurant in Albany Park was cute. That was his favorite word for my work. Cute. Like I was a child playing restaurant. There were 3 dinners in particular that I want to tell you about because they explain why what happened at the engagement party wasn't really about the engagement party at all. The first was in February, 8 months before everything. Valentine's weekend, the bistro near Wrigley. I'd just landed a contract to write a small book. A Guide to Immigrant Family Restaurants in Chicago, with a real publisher, Agate, out of Evanston. The advance was $12,000, which was nothing to my father but felt like the world to me. I told my mother about it on the phone, and she'd said, "Oh, honey, tell your dad tonight, he'll be so proud." I should have known. I did know, on some level, but I told them. My father set down his wine glass. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, $12,000 to write a book about Mexican food in Cicero. Hannah. Marcus made $12,000 in tips last weekend. Do you understand what you're doing with your life? Marcus didn't even look up from his risotto. I drove home that night and I called Sophia and I cried for an hour. I told her I was done, I was finished, I was never going back. She said, "Good, baby, you shouldn't go back." And then my mother called the next morning and asked if I was free for brunch. The second dinner was in May, the steakhouse. It was supposed to be my mother's birthday, but she'd had a checkup that week. Clean, thank God, and the whole evening was really about my father being relieved and not knowing how to say so. He drank too much. Marcus had brought Caroline for the first time, and I liked her immediately. This quiet, smart woman who taught art history at DePaul and who actually asked me questions about my work and listened to the answers. Halfway through the meal, my father turned to Caroline and said, "You know, you're going to be marrying into a real family. Whitmores have built things. We don't just write about things people built." He laughed at his own joke. Marcus laughed too. Caroline didn't. She looked at me with something close to horror, and I just shook my head a little, like, "Don't, it's fine. It's not your battle." She emailed me the next day. "Hannah, I'm so sorry. That wasn't okay." I didn't write back for 3 days because I didn't know how to. In all the years of those dinners, no one had ever apologized to me for anything my father said, not even my mother. The third dinner was September, 3 weeks before the engagement party. My father had invited his 3 top managers and their wives, a working dinner, sort of, but at the flagship, and my mother had insisted I come. The piece I'd written for Bon Appetit had just gone up that morning. It was about a Vietnamese family that had been running a sandwich shop in Uptown since 1985, and how the youngest daughter had taken it over when her father got sick. It was the best thing I'd ever written. It had 400 comments by noon. I sat down at the table, and my father didn't say a word about it. Not one. He talked about a new location they were scouting in Wicker Park. He talked about Marcus's plan to update the menu. He talked about the weather. And finally, near the end of the meal, one of the managers, a man named Paul, who I'd known since I was 12, leaned across the table and said, "Hannah, that piece you wrote today. My wife sent it to me. We're going there this weekend." My father set down his fork. "What piece?" he said. And the look on his face. It wasn't pride. It wasn't curiosity. It was something I'd never seen before. It was anger. Like the fact that one of his own managers had read my work, had been moved by it, had told my father about it before my father knew. That was a kind of betrayal. The room got quiet. Paul realized what he'd done and started backpedaling. My father stared at me for what felt like a full minute and then said, very quietly, "Hannah, can I see you in the kitchen for a moment?" I followed him back. The line cooks all suddenly had somewhere else to be. He turned to me with his arms crossed and he said, "And I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life." He said, "If you ever upstage me in my own restaurant again, you will not be welcome here. Do you understand me?" I understood. I drove home that night and I told Sophia I was finished, really finished. And then my mother called Saturday and asked if I'd come to Marcus's engagement party, and she sounded so tired and I said yes. I said yes. That's the part I have to own. So now you know why. When my father stood up at the engagement party and called me an embarrassment in front of 40 people, what came out of my mouth wasn't really a response to that one toast. It was a response to 28 years of being told my worth was contingent on my last name and my last paycheck. And when I told him to take my name off the West Loop building, that was the apartment my parents had bought me as a college graduation present. A little condo in the West Loop that I'd actually never lived in because I'd preferred to rent my own place in Logan Square with my own money. When I said that, what I was really telling him was, I am done being owned. I drove home and I slept for 13 hours. I woke up Sunday afternoon and my phone had 47 missed calls. My mother. My father, once. Marcus, 6 times. Aunt Teresa, who'd been there. 2 cousins. A few of my parents' friends who'd been there and apparently felt compelled to weigh in. I didn't answer any of them. I made coffee. I texted Sophia it happened. She came over with breakfast burritos and we sat on my couch and I told her everything. And she held my hand and didn't tell me I'd done the right thing because she knew I didn't need to hear it. She just sat with me. That afternoon, I emailed my landlord and told him I was renewing my lease. I emailed my editor at Agate and told her the manuscript would be done by January, no more extensions. I logged into my bank account and looked at the number, $23,400, my entire life savings, and I felt, for the first time in maybe my whole adult life, like that number was actually mine. Like every dollar in it had been earned by me, and none of it was a leash. On Monday morning, I called my Aunt Rosalind, my father's older sister. The black sheep of his generation, a woman who'd left Chicago at 22 to go to art school in San Francisco, and who'd been the only adult in my life growing up who ever told me my writing was good. She was 71 and lived in a craftsman house in Oak Park with about 100 books and 3 cats. I told her what had happened. She listened all the way through. And then she said, "Hannah, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you when you were 15. Your father is a small man in a big suit. He always has been. Don't you dare let him make you small to match him." I cried for 10 minutes after we hung up. Then I got to work. The next 6 months were the hardest and the best of my life. I doubled down on the book. I wrote 10 hours a day, took 3 more freelance assignments to keep the rent paid, and I started doing something I'd never done before. I started taking myself seriously. I hired an accountant. I incorporated Cheap Plates as an LLC. I bought a domain name that wasn't free. My family didn't reach out for about 3 weeks, and then it started. Slowly at first. My mother sent a card with no message, just her signature. Then an email. "Hannah, I miss you. Can we talk?" I wrote back, finally, and said, "Mom, I love you. But until you can have a conversation with me about what Dad did and what you didn't do, I can't." She didn't write back for a month. My father sent me a letter through his lawyer in December. An actual letter, on cream-colored stationery, drafted by an attorney. It said that, in light of recent events, he was restructuring family financial arrangements, meaning he was taking me off the deed to the West Loop place. Which was fine. That was what I'd asked for. It also said, in language clearly written by someone billing $400 an hour, that if I wished to rejoin family operations in any capacity, the door remained open. I framed the letter. I'm not even joking. It hangs in my office now, right above my desk. It reminds me what it looks like when a man cannot bring himself to apologize, but also cannot stand to lose. Marcus showed up at my apartment on a Saturday in January. I hadn't seen him since the party. He was holding a cardboard box and looking like he hadn't slept in a week. I let him in. I made him coffee. He sat on my couch, and for a long time he didn't say anything. Then he said, "Hannah, I read your book." The manuscript wasn't out yet. I'd given an early copy to 2 people, my editor and Sophia. Marcus had gotten his hands on a galley somehow, and I later found out it was Caroline. She'd asked Agate for one. She'd been reading my work for months. She'd given it to Marcus and told him he needed to read every word. He'd read every word. "You're a really good writer," he said, and his voice broke a little. "You're a really good writer, Hannah." And I never read any of it. I never read any of it because I was scared. Because if it was good, I was going to have to admit that Dad had been wrong about you. That I'd been wrong about you. And it was easier to call it cute and pretend I hadn't seen it. I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. He told me things I hadn't known. That the restaurant group was in trouble. Not catastrophic, but real trouble. That my father had over-leveraged for the Wicker Park expansion and that the steakhouse was losing money. That Marcus had been trying to talk him out of opening a 7th location for over a year, and my father wouldn't listen. That Caroline had told him 3 weeks before the wedding that she couldn't marry into a family that treated its own daughter that way unless something changed. That she'd been the one who'd opened his eyes. He pushed the box toward me. Inside were every birthday card I'd ever made him as a kid, every drawing, the little laminated copy of my first byline that I'd given him when Eater published me the first time. He'd kept all of it. In a box. In his closet. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I'm asking you to let me try to be different." I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded and stood up and hugged me, and I realized I hadn't been hugged by anyone in my family in nearly a year. The book came out in May 2024. Cheap Plates: Stories from the Tables That Built Chicago. It got a half-page review in the Tribune. It got a mention on NPR. It sold out its first print run in 9 weeks, and Agate ordered a second printing. Bon Appetit put me on their list of food writers to watch. I got an email from a literary agent in New York asking if I had a second book in me. I had 3. I started doing readings at independent bookstores around the Midwest: Madison, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, Detroit. Sophia came with me to most of them. So did Caroline, sometimes when Marcus could spare her. My mother came to one in Evanston, alone, and sat in the back row and cried through the whole thing, and afterwards she came up to me and said, "I'm sorry, Hannah. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have said something every single time." And I held her and I told her I forgave her because I'd had time, and because she meant it. She'd been to therapy. She told me about it. She was working on it. That's all I'd ever wanted. My father didn't come. The Whitmore restaurant group sold the steakhouse in late 2024. The Wicker Park location never opened. The flagship is still doing fine, but the empire isn't expanding anymore. Marcus stepped back from the kitchen to focus on operations and brought in a young chef from Pilsen, a woman I'd written about, actually, and my second piece for Bon Appetit, to run the menu. The food got better. The reviews picked up. He texted me about it sometimes. I haven't spoken to my father in 15 months. He sent a card at Christmas. It said, "Merry Christmas, Hannah." Dad. That was the whole message. I didn't send one back, not out of cruelty. Just because I don't owe him a response, and I'm not going to manufacture warmth I don't feel. If he ever wants a relationship with me, he knows where I am. He can pick up a phone, he can say, "I'm sorry, Hannah. I was wrong about you." I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not closed off either. I'm just done chasing. Last month I gave a talk at Northwestern, my old journalism school, 120 undergrads in a lecture hall, and I told them what I'm telling you now, that if anyone in your life, even the people who made you, tries to convince you that your work doesn't matter because it doesn't make them money, or because it doesn't carry their name, or because it makes them feel small when you grow, those people are not telling you the truth about yourself. They're telling you the truth about themselves. A girl came up to me afterward. She must have been 20. She told me her father was a surgeon and she wanted to be a poet, and could I tell her how I'd done it? And I thought about that night in October, the champagne dress, the duck confit I never ate, the valet who knew before I did that I was leaving for good. I told her, "You don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Not to keep them comfortable. Not even if they raised you. Your self-respect is the one thing in this world no one else can give you and no one else can take away, unless you hand it over. And once you stop handing it over, you'll be amazed what you can build with the hands that used to be holding it out." She wrote it down in a little notebook. I hope she keeps it. The other night, I was eating dinner alone at my kitchen counter. Pasta with butter and parmesan, nothing fancy. The kind of meal that wouldn't make it onto any Whitmore menu. Sophia was supposed to come over, but she'd canceled because her kid had a fever. I had the windows open. I could hear the L going by 2 blocks over. And I thought about the girl who walked into that engagement party in October 2023 wearing a clearance dress, hoping her father would be different this time, knowing he wouldn't. I wanted to tell her something. I wanted to reach back through time and put my hand on her shoulder and say, "It's okay. You're going to stand up. You're going to walk out. And the life you build on the other side is going to be so much bigger than the one they wanted to keep you in." That's the part nobody tells you about choosing yourself. They make it sound like a loss. Like you're giving up your family, your history, your inheritance. You're not. You're just trading a version of yourself you were never going to fit into for a version of yourself you actually get to live in. And I promise you, on every dollar I've earned with my own name, it's worth it. Every single time. When I look back at the woman who walked into that engagement party in October 2023, I don't recognize her, and I'm not sorry about that. She was someone built almost entirely out of waiting. Waiting for my father to read one of my articles, waiting for Marcus to stop calling my work cute, waiting for my mother to defend me just once at a dinner table. I spent 28 years of my life building a small, quiet shrine to other people's approval, and the truth I had to learn the hard way is that you cannot earn what someone has already decided not to give you. You can only stop asking. Everything that happened after that night happened because of one decision, and I want to be honest about what the decision actually was. It wasn't standing up. It wasn't the line about the deed. It was the months and months after, when nobody was watching and nobody was clapping, when I made myself sit down and write 1,000 words a day, even when I was scared, even when I missed my mother, even when the easier thing would have been to text my father and say I'm sorry. Let's just go back to how it was. Nobody talks about that part. The part where self-respect isn't a single dramatic moment, but 1,000 small mornings of choosing yourself when no one's there to notice. My father's empire didn't crumble because of karma. It crumbled because he made decisions out of ego instead of wisdom. And when you build something on the wrong foundation, the foundation eventually finds you out. My brother didn't show up at my apartment that January because the universe forced him to. He showed up because Caroline held up a mirror and he was finally brave enough to look in it. None of this was magic. It was cause and effect, the way it always is, and the people who get hurt the most are usually the ones who refuse to see what their own choices were quietly building. What I want to leave you with isn't a quote about resilience, it's something simpler. Your character is the only thing in this life that compounds without anyone else's permission. The integrity you practice when no one's looking, the discipline you keep when no one's clapping, the kindness you offer to yourself when the people who should have offered it didn't. Those things accumulate. They become a person. They become a life. I don't know what your family looks like. I don't know who in your life has made you feel small for being exactly the shape you were born to be. But I know this. You are not the disgrace. The person who needed to shrink you to feel tall is the disgrace. And the kindest, hardest, most loving thing you can ever do for yourself is to stop handing them the scissors. Build the life. Do the work. Tell the truth. The rest will sort itself out, and the people who were meant to walk with you will find their way to your door.